wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I have a hole in my stomach!
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Good morning. Thank you all for joining me on She Became Visible. You are not going to be sorry that you did this morning. And if you are watching this after the live broadcast, then you will be sorry that you weren't here this morning. All right. But my guest today is someone that I have been following for a long time. We've been trying to coordinate our schedules to get Allie on the podcast, and it's finally worked. And you are going to be blown out of your socks. I have a special co-host with me today. I've invited Chanel Achenbach to join me today, and we're going to be discussing with Allie her book, I Won't Shut Up. And the subtitle is Finding Your Voice When the World Tries to Silence You. And there are so many fabulous quotes that I'm going to read to you from this book. But I related to this book so much. And I don't know whether it's because I'm from the Midwest and I get kind of the feeling of the Midwest, or whether it was her talking about going to a dance and getting all dressed up, but nobody asked her to dance. And I'm like, yeah, that was pretty much my whole life. And there's just so many times that I related so much to what she said. And so we're going to go through all of that, but I don't want to spend any more time. I'm going to let me introduce you to tell you a little bit about Allie. She is the author of I Won't Shut Up, Finding Your Voice When the World Tries to Silence You. She is a writer, a speaker, an advocate minister, and vice president of The Witness, a Black Christian collective, an organization committed to encouraging, engaging, and empowering Black Christians toward liberation from racism. Allie completed her Master of Divinity from Fuller Seminary with the emphasis in race, cultural identity, and reconciliation, and she hopes to lead a church someday. Since 2014, Allie has been leading conversations about race on her blog, The Armchair Commentary, and on social media, where her posts reach millions each month. She is a proud Chicago South Sider. So that is my introduction. Let me bring on Chanel. Hey, girl.
Hey.
And I have to tell you, I called Chanel and I said, you got to read this book. And she, like me, became obsessed. And it was just so great that she and I had something we could talk about. And let's bring on, here's Johnny. I feel like there should be some kind of introduction. Let's bring on Allie. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Oh my gosh, you do not know what a pleasure it is. I'm just blown out of my mind. And this is the beauty of social media, is that I have a chance to talk to you in person. It's just absolutely amazing. So we're just going to get right into it. I want to start out because one of the things, and it was just right off the bat, in your dedication, you dedicated this book for my ancestors and to my descendants. And what I loved about that is the idea that you appreciated and you're so grateful for what your ancestors did to build this platform, but you're making a difference for your descendants. And the reason, Allie, that meant so much to me and really touched me was I didn't grow up in the Mormon church, but my parents converted when I was 12. So I don't have that pioneer heritage. I can't be one of the people that says my grandmother walked the plains. She came, took a ship from England, landed in Ohio, and then walked from Ohio to Salt Lake. Therefore, I cannot give up this system that I've been born into because of my ancestral, heritage. And I think to myself, and so when you said that, my first thought was, yeah, but what about your descendants? So playing tribute to your ancestors, but what are you doing to the people behind, in front of you? And so that just that little dedication was enough for me to go, oh man, this is amazing. So I'm just so anxious, and I hope we won't keep you for longer than an hour, but there's a good possibility that we might. So tell your husband, put the girls in bed, and sorry, I'm going to be talking to these girls for a I won't keep you. We don't do long form.
That's all right. That's all right.
Okay. So Chanel, do you have anything you wanted to start out with?
Yes. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to try to keep my emotions under wrap because this is about you. But I'm telling you what, when you talk about somebody that spoke my language, that spoke to me, that I could relate to, it was your book, honey. It was everything about everything that you said. I literally have goosebumps right now. I'm trying to be calm. I'm trying to just, I can't believe you're here. And I'm very, very grateful. Your book speaks volumes, and I'm telling you, it is going to change lives. It already changed mine. I promise.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that.
So Allie, tell all of my listeners, one of the things that I appreciate of deconstruction and being more awakened to the reality of what's going on in life is that it's forced me to learn truths in a lot of different areas. When I uncovered the hidden whitewashed history of the Mormon Church, it opened my eyes to go, well, what else have I been listening to that's a whitewashed version of America, the founding fathers, colonization, everything. And so it's really led me down so many different rabbit holes. And I cannot even remember how I found you. But I read Roxane Gay's book first, A Bad Feminist. And I related to her because I thought, yeah, I'm kind of a bad feminist because I'm really like, yes, women power. And then I'm like, you need to go home with your kids, you need to be a stay-at-home mother. I'm like, oh, bad. That was a bad feminist. But when you grow up and I don't know, Allie, tell me if you feel like this. There's something in the Midwest about that black and white binary thinking. And so I grew up with that just in my family. And then that's very typical of a Mormon upbringing where there's truth and there's untruth. And we have the truth and everything else is untrue. And so trying to find gray and giving space to other things is new. This is new to me. And it's just overwhelming sometimes to go, oh man, that wasn't true either. Or what? That happened? How naive have I been my whole entire life? So tell everyone, because you talk a lot about that. I love in your book how you even said things like, my husband told me, other people told me, but I just couldn't listen, things like that. Tell the audience a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. So I grew up in Missouri, which is the show me state, and you talk about some of that black and white or some of that binary thinking. I think that oftentimes Missourians, we very much are kind of baptized in unbelief, and so we're the type of people that you got to show that it's not just tell me about it, it's show me the thing too. And so that's sort of what I came from. And so I think that in terms of talking about race and racism and that sort of thing, there definitely is kind of this mindset where people have their ways of moving throughout the world and understanding the world, and it can be hard to challenge people's perceptions about those things, and it can be hard to change people's perspectives because they just don't often see outside of what they know. And so the Midwest, the lower Midwest, I live in Chicago now, and something that I've learned is that Chicagoans see, and people like Illinois, Upper Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they see themselves as the Midwest, and they, I guess for whatever reason, see Missouri as the South, which is really funny because then it's like, no, Missouri is not the South. But so I kind of have made this distinction between Upper Midwest and Lower Midwest. And so as somebody from the Lower Midwest, which is very wide, Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, Nebraska, which isn't really the lower Midwest, Iowa, those are all very white places. You have where, because of the Great Migration, you have pockets of diversity and whatnot, pockets of Black folks in some of the major cities like St. Louis and Kansas City and Omaha and Des Moines and whatnot. But for the most part, whenever you travel through some of these states that I named, you're running into white folks. It's mostly white people, and then there's a few places in Missouri. There are a few predominantly Black small towns, and those exist because of segregation. But the reality there, the lived experience there, is a very white lived experience. And so to then be a person who's saying, actually, all of this whiteness breeds racism. All of this whiteness means that y'all was keeping people as slaves. Missouri, the Missouri Compromise, Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, even though it was still in the Union. It never seceded. It was in the Union, but it was a slave state. And then people were riding over into the Kansas territory trying to make it a slave state too. But you have this very deep history of racism embedded. You have this very deep history of segregation and all of these other different types of things that come to bear. Yet some of that rigidity that people experience, some of that rigidity that people see, some of that show me attitude, then kind of comes to bear in whenever you're a person that's then speaking up about your experience. People don't want to believe you because they can't see it, or they want to argue with you because they don't understand it.
Isn't that amazing? I love when you pointed that out, that because that's so prevalent in the LDS church when you bring up history or experiences that you've had. And the first thing they'll say is, that's not true. I've never heard that. That's not what they said. That can't be true. That bishops are called of God. That can't be true that they did that bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because they just haven't experienced. Now, Chanel, tell Allie, you also spent quite a bit of time in Springfield. So
I spent a lot of time in Springfield. So when I was reading your book and also listening to it on Audible, when I heard Joplin, I'm like, no, I know where that is. I actually served my mission in the four corners of the states that connect. It was Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about racism, so this was 93 to 95. So I was 21, turning 23. I was also in like Fort Lindenwood, Missouri, where the military base is. That was the last area I was in. And after my mission, I actually went back and lived in Springfield for about a year. So I don't know if you're familiar with Washita Drive, but that's where I lived. And
I know.
yeah, I lived there. Right?
I know that.
I'm like, when I was reading your book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can relate to a lot of things. And as I was reading your book, I can relate to so much. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, like, if I ever talked to anybody, she would get it. I have a white husband. I have children. I just listened to some of the things that you were saying, and I'm saying she gets that, and it just a certain thing stuck out. I'm like, this book was what, about 7-hour read. So we don't have 7 hours to talk about it. So I had to pick the things that stuck out the most. But what I can say right now is being in Missouri, going to Kansas City, being in Springfield, Ozark, Nixa, the surrounding Branson, just listening to how people talk to me. I was 23, 24 the time I was there. So when you talk about the dancing, like being asked to dance, I know we're maybe moving forward, but the thing that you said that stuck out so much that just made my skin crawl was the disdain that they had when I was
Mhm.
like, "You don't want to dance with me?" They're like, "Ugh." And I talk about that on Mormon Stories, them just being so offended that I'm like, "Do
Mhm.
you think I'm cute? Do you want to dance or you want to date me?" And they're like, "Oh," like so mad that I had the gall to be like
Mhm.
to consider me. When you
Yeah.
said that, I felt all of that. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's one of the things that I love in your book, Allie. You say, I hope that as you read this book, you will find yourself in my story. I hope that as you find yourself in my story, you will also find your voice. I hope that finding your voice will help you to speak the truth, and I hope that the truth will set you free. I love that. I thought that was such a great way to get the book started because, as you say, we're all not going to walk on the same journey. We're all going to be on different
Mhm.
journeys, but I can relate to, feelings. I can relate to the female part of your voice. I can relate to the misogyny. I can't relate to some things. Chanel can. But Allie, I don't know if you're familiar, but Chanel has a fabulous story because she joined the church, and the Mormon church had what they call the priesthood ban, where
Mhm.
blacks weren't allowed to hold the priesthood until
Mhm.
1978. And
Mhm.
Chanel went on her mission. Would you say 93?
93 to 95. Uh-huh.
93 to 95, had no idea, didn't know anything about that because that's the gaslighting that they do is
Yeah.
when something happens, they push it under. And
Mhm.
so her awakening to something like that was like, what do you, that can't be true. So even though, like you're saying, where you're at on your mission, she's teaching the gospel, trying to convert people, and people are saying, you know, and tell Allie, Chanel, tell Allie, like some of the repercussions that you've gotten from Black LDS people that have chosen to stay in the church. What kind of kickback you've gotten from that?
Well, I did want to touch on that, and I wanted to ask Allie about that. And Allie, I'll any questions I ask you that you don't feel comfortable answer, you could just say, I would rather not answer that. I'm okay with that. When I think about members of the church that still stay that are Black, and knowing the truth about what the church has taught about Black people, I ask them, what is it that makes you stay? But then I have to think about what is it that made me stay. I was trying to find community. One thing that happened to me is that they take you away from your family, and then you're just around, like you said, whiteness. You're just around whiteness,
Mhm.
and you're trying to figure that out. You're trying to figure out how that works. And so, as I think about my experience, and I think about the things that you said in your book, some questions I had for you, um, that I was curious about it. Again, if you don't feel comfortable answering that, that's fine. Since Candace Owens is quoted to us a lot, and Thomas Sowell is referred to a lot, what are your thoughts on Candace Owens and how um, she affects how racism is in America?
Wow. So, there are a lot of Black people who benefit from white supremacy. And what I mean by that is that, like, as a Black person, this society wasn't created for me. It wasn't structured for me. I do not benefit from white supremacy at all whatsoever. But there are Black folks who leverage white supremacy, who leverage white folks' negative impulses toward Black people, and they're able to leverage that and parlay that into success, into stardom, into money, into positions on the Supreme Court, into book deals, into whatever. And so, when I try and really not to think a whole lot and like, put a whole lot of my headspace on people like Candace, on people like Thomas Sowell, on folks like Clarence Thomas and that type of stuff, because I'm working for their freedom too. Like, so, I want for everybody to be free. We're not free until we're all free. So I
Mm,
am working for their freedom too, even though they don't necessarily realize that they need to be free because it's profitable. It is
Right.
it is profitable to be a black, like right now, to be a black person that somehow offers counter narratives to the history that we have. And so for me, the things that Candace Owens trades in specifically, but you could also say this for a lot of others who are similar to her, is it's trading in stereotypes and ideas, bad ideas about black people. Like a lot of people, just a lot of these folks, like Candace Owens, just regurgitate like the Moynihan report, which is something that came out in the 60s. And it was essentially this report that essentially like pathologized black people, pathologized blackness, pathologized even aspects of the black power movement, of the civil rights movement, and different things. And basically like where we get these ideas of black on black crime, where we get these ideas of black women being welfare queens, where we get this narrative of black children being fatherless. It really, like any kind of negative thing that you could think about the black community, probably finds its origins honestly before the Moynihan report. But the Moynihan report kind of took all these things that people were saying and kind of put them in one place and kind of gave us this civil rights or post civil rights narrative for why all these things exist, and essentially even acted as a rationale for why certain social programs and certain things wouldn't necessarily work and weren't necessarily beneficial for the black community. And so all Candace and some of them folks is doing, all they're doing is regurgitating some of these same ideas and repackage. So basically they're saying the things that racist white folks want to hear, but it's a black person saying it. And so then white folks don't feel racist because you have a black face saying these same things that they think. But a lot of what they're saying is just repackaged racism. It's the TV dinner of racism. It's like something that's been freeze dried, packaged up, you throw it in the microwave, you pop it out, and here you go. Here's some racism in blackface.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear you on that. I had a question before I forget about your book. So, the title of your book is I Won't Shut Up. So I have a question, two questions. What made you choose that title, and did you have other titles that you considered before that one?
No, so first of all, that was the title. That was the title from the beginning. Pretty much from the beginning. I think originally it was something like no, I won't shut up. And then my agent suggested that like drop the no and just like I won't shut up. And then my agent, shout out to Trinity McFadden at the bindery. She was the one who came up with the subtitle and stuff on that. There were other titles that I kicked around. I won't shut up was always the working title. But there were a few other titles and stuff that I kicked around, but that was always the original title. That was always the main title that I was working under with that. The way that the title sort of came to be was as I was thinking of just some of the different stories to tell and whatnot within the book, and some of those stories made it into the book, and then some of those stories I decided to hold, and they'll probably show up in some shape or form in other pieces that I do. But I noticed that there was just this theme of being silenced, and at various turns in my life, various things happening, being silenced by people. And so that it just seemed like a good title.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly like I said, when you've got a fundamental religion, especially right now, we'll have to talk a little bit about this new kind of Christian nationalism that's getting very popular right now, very much a white male patriarchal system as far as calling the country to become a Christian nation. And what they're really saying is a white Christian nation is really what they're saying. But you talk about just the appearance of being accepting, but then there's this underlying thing that's kind of being really said. And it reminds me of the Christian nationalism movement, because when my husband and I actually went and saw the movie God to Country, which was all about this new movement and how scary it is. And in the movie, they highlighted a lot of very loud, pulpit pounding evangelical pastors that are walking back and forth and blah, you know. And so I feel like people that are in a more subtle Christian religion, because, like, for example, in the Mormon religion, the people are saying the same thing, but they're saying it very calmly,
Mhm.
and they don't have a Southern accent. I know you talked a little bit about that, and they don't have that pounding, but they're saying the exact same thing. But the people in the audience don't hear it because it's being projected more pleasingly. And, you know, so I think that's what one of the things that you're talking about is just the presentation, the kind of like, oh no, they didn't say that. It's like, no, that's exactly what they said, if you were really listening. But yeah. So one of the other things that I wanted to quote from your book. This is in your the chapter, Barack Obama is the Antichrist. That's a great chapter. And you said, I can't go back in time, but I can offer you the reassurances and affirmations I would give myself. If you are worthy of dignity, gentleness, and kindness, you are not alone. You do not have to remain silent. There are others who are longing for your voice to reassure them that they are not alone either. All you have to do is speak up. Even if it makes white people uncomfortable, even if your voice shakes, speaking your truth is powerful, and the truth has the power to set you free. And I just love that. You talk in the book about kind of having to let go of a friendship that you had for, now I'm thinking, was the friend that you mentioned that you finally had to let her go, was this one of the childhood friends that you had?
No,
Okay.
she wasn't a childhood friend. She was someone, that we attended the same church. I had started she graduated high school the year after I did. So whenever I moved to Springfield and started attending the church, she was still in high school, and I was a freshman in college. And her family were people that really kind of took my husband and I in. I was really good friends. Um, I was really good friends with her dad. Her dad and I played music together sometimes and whatnot. Was good friends. Was really good friends with her stepmom, and some of her extended family. And so then also because she was her and then her sisters were kids who were some of my youth group kids and everything. We had this connection. And so whenever I had moved back to Springfield after living in Virginia for a while, we became friends, became better friends. We like I said, you know, we knew some of the same people. Obviously, I knew her family. We were always kind of around each other in different respects. Not like always, but I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to overplay what this friendship was. But she was somebody that I had a lot of respect for. And whenever I moved back to Springfield and started attending the church again, she was one of my friends. And you know, I was somebody who was invited. She had a small baby shower with one of her kids, and I was, you know, one of the handful of people that was invited to her baby shower. We worked together within the church and ministry in the church every single week for a while, and we were really developing. We had and were, you know, becoming good close friends. And then all of a sudden, you know, this friendship just kind of went south. And the friendship went south again. You know, like I said, you know, we'd known each other for upward of 15 years. And that relationship just kind of went south because I took a stand about racism that she didn't like. And she just simply wasn't able to hear what I had to say about that. And she even kind of bullied me in some ways. There's some things I can't remember how much of the story I tell in the book, because of course, you know, you tell the story, then you got to edit, you got
Right.
to like
Right,
whatever,
right, right, right.
to try to, because like I'm not trying to like pour out all of the
Yeah.
details of everything in this. It's just but so you get the point. But basically, you know, I had said some things that she didn't like. She had taken it upon herself to police some of the things that I said, and I wasn't going to change what I said because what I said was the truth, and she didn't like that truth. And so because of that, unfortunately, she felt. I actually did not let her go. She was the one who kind of felt like she kind of announced to me that she, you know, was gonna have to place distance from me and all this other type of stuff. And so it was kind of like, all right. And so, it was sad. It was sad,
Yeah.
and it was devastating. There was a lot of, there was a lot of kind of trauma that I experienced from that, but then there also was an aspect to which I realized that I had to be true to myself. I had to be true to the message that I believed, was important for me to state, and so within that I had to just allow that friendship to sour and allow that thing, had to just kind of allow that thing to go, and had to kind of allow it to run its course. And it was sad, and it was devastating in a lot of ways, for me, and I don't want to undersell that.
Yeah.
It was like I don't want to oversell the depth of the friendship, but I also don't want to undersell it either, because she was somebody who was important to me, and her family absolutely were people who I admired and looked up to. And but yeah, there just got to be a point when, you know, sometimes you say things and you take a stand, and people, you're making the journey and people aren't able to make the journey with you. And that was one of those situations where somebody was unable to make the journey with me, because they were unable to see maybe where some of their own bias, where, you know, in her case, I think some of her own bias, some of her politics, some of her, just her own sensitivities and whatnot, just didn't, it made it hard for us to have a path forward as friends.
Right. Right. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about that fork in the road where there are often times when you have to be willing to go off and go your own direction. And Chanel, you've had that a lot. I know you talk about, Chanel is really active on TikTok. Are you on TikTok, Allie? Because I couldn't find an app.
Yes, I am
Okay,
on
you're going to have
TikTok.
to give me your handle, because I was typing in Allie Henny and I couldn't get anybody to pop up. So I'm going to have to go back and edit and be sure I put your connections in the links so that people can find you. So at the end, well, I'll have you tell everybody how they can find you, because as you said, you're on social media a lot, and so
Mhm.
I definitely want people. But Chanel is also on TikTok a lot, and Chanel, you're kind of, talk a little bit, or tell Allie a little bit about, you've kind of gone through the same thing where things are kind of you're having relationship issues that you didn't think you would have, but
No, no, not at all.
yeah.
And the thing that is so hard when Ali says, you know, how significant it is to not underplay that. It is significant because as an 18-year-old being taken away from my family and told not to refer to my family for any life lessons because the church is what I need to be concerned with, and then to listen to all of them, and then to start questioning things to finally be like, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. Well, that was my community. So if I try to talk about racism, or I talk about things that are harmful and hurtful to me, they are not ready to receive that. And so there's something that Ali says in chapter 8 when she talks about keeping it real, the holy hell no. uh, like not being treated with gentleness and dignity and respect. Um, she says that the pastor says the benefit of assumed confidence. No, that's not what I want to say. I wanted to say when he was saying that he didn't want her to be an activist. I get that a lot with my friends now, or I don't consider them friends anymore, but they would say, "You're not the same. You're not the Chanel I know." And I consider that as I'm not being the agreeable Negro. I'm no
Mhm.
longer saying, "Oh, it's okay if you're racist to me. You didn't know any better."
Mhm.
They liked that because they could get away with things, and I could just say, I forgive you. I know you didn't mean it. Now I'm like, you know what? That's not okay. That's actually racist. That's actually harmful. Actually, I don't like that. Please don't say that.
Mhm.
And that's they're not used to that. So for over 20 something years, I just kind of like, okay, and now I'm not cowering and saying no. And so if I'm around, I mean, now now they're actually calling me an angry black woman because
Mm.
I made a post on TikTok. I made a video and said, okay, so I leave the Mormon community, which is extremely racist.
Mhm.
to an ex-Mormon community, and I said, "Hey, let me address something. Ladies, I'm not even talking to the men because the men are trying. Ladies, you are no different than the Mormon women. You think you're in an ex-Mormon space that you're not racist. You are." And now they're saying, "Oh, so we're now white supremacists. You're so mean. You're awful. Oh, you're angry. I'm scared of her because I got mad."
Mm.
Usually I control myself. I'm like, "Hey, I don't like that. This is not nice. Please stop." I was like, "That's enough. I don't like it. Please stop." That
Mhm.
tone is now terrifying, that I'm so dangerous and
Mm.
they're
Mhm.
terrified of me and I'm so angry. Yet they've been making videos for years, harassing people, insulting people, making fun of people, dressing up like people, making fun of them. But the minute I actually got mad, now it's unbearable. My
Mm.
tone is just so scary, and that's hard. But Ali, I like when you say, "I hope that you find yourself in this book." I felt all of that, because a person that's consistently being silenced and not having anybody else to be there with me to say,
Mhm.
"Hey, leave her alone and let her talk," losing my voice. You talk about that in chapter 3 about, you were telling jokes and they said, "I bet you can't be quiet." They did that to me a lot, you know, and so then I would just be quiet just to prove that I could. I didn't,
Mhm.
but they kind of like do a mind thing with you, and then you're like quiet. And so, or they'll tell you that you're stereotypical, you're that angry black woman. So then you stop talking so that you don't seem like an angry black woman. And that's what they want. They want you to be quiet because they don't want to feel uncomfortable. They do not like being uncomfortable. They like you being uncomfortable as a black woman,
Mhm.
but they do not want to be uncomfortable. They do not want to be marked as or labeled anything but nice and sweet.
Mhm.
And that is, I think I heard that tone throughout your book. Um, yeah, but I like when you said keeping it real. I loved it. So
Yeah, I think that, something that often happens in spaces that people, um, they're leaving one aspect of themselves. So, I mean, you talk about, like, in the ex-Mormon community, you get this in communities and stuff where people are, deconstructing maybe their Christian faith or whatever. You get this in, like, queer spaces, LGBT spaces where, that are white dominated, where there is a form of white supremacy that shows up, where people think that, well, because they are, the good guys, they're the good people who are doing the good thing, and they are disentangling themselves from, one harmful system. They don't really do the work of disentangling themselves from other harmful systems, namely racism. So, like what you were talking about experiencing in, like, this ex-Mormon community, that's a very common experience that Black folks have in various communities where there are well-meaning white people, and they really, like I said, they are trying to disentangle from some negative aspect of society or some negative aspect of the human experience. And so they do that. They say, at the Mormon church, I'm not with that anymore. Let me leave that. And so they do that. Or they say, I don't want to be a fundamentalist Christian anymore, so I'm leaving that space and I want to do that. Or they're saying, um, we want to create a safe space for people who are disabled or for people who are LGBT or whatever. And they do that, but then they still import their racism into those spaces. And they still they don't let go of their investment in white supremacy. And that is such a common and profound experience. And I think that for people, who are finding themselves, Black folks who found themselves as kind of, the only in one space, and then you end up in a space and you're kind of one of a few or one of the only in another space, you often find yourself experiencing people's racism. Something, for myself in my own experience, being in, certain Christian spaces, being in my background is Pentecostalism. and so of Pentecostalism and the charismatic movement. And so I've been in spaces with people, with other Christians who have sort of left some of the more fundamentalist forms that the Pentecostal and charismatic movement take on, and they are trying to create space for themselves. But then they end up taking their racism with them, and they end up acting like, Black Pentecostals don't exist, that Black charismatic folk don't exist. And they can't see that, well, the things that you subtly think, the things that you subtly believe, the ways that you kind of live and move and have your being, um, a lot of those things are racist. You rally against the doctrine or the dogma that you were taught, but and you can see where some of those things are not helpful or not productive. But because racism is often one of the silent killers in those contexts, they don't realize that, like, you're doing all this, but you're doing all this disinvesting from these ideologies. You're detangling yourself from those things, but you're not detangling yourself from the isms and the phobias that are present within those spaces. And you see that even and not to bang on more conservative people, because I see this in quote unquote liberal spaces too, where it's like, great, we understand that we need to advocate for queer people. We understand that we need to advocate for disabled people. We realize that we can't do the isms and the phobias, but then racism ends up being the one that people forget that they shouldn't do. Whatever the community, however the community set up. So if it's disability activism, it's disability activism, but then we forget that Black disabled people exist. Or it's queer activism, something that has become a pet peeve of mine. I understand that sometimes our language is limited in how we can include people, but people will be like, oh, the Black community and the LGBT community. And it's like, Black queer people exist. So whenever you
Yes.
are upset about somebody calling out something that is happening within the LGBTQ community, and it's Black people that, I'm cis het, and I try to stay in my lane as a cis het person, and at the same time there are things that I call out that might touch on some white LGBT people's feelings, because y'all be racist too. And then it's like, oh, well, but this is the LGBT community. And it's like, yeah, it's the LGBT community. Yeah, I understand that y'all have some intersecting concerns, but also Black queer people exist. And so
Yes.
you making that delineation between the Black community and the LGBT community, what you're telling me whenever you say that is that you don't see Black queer folks as part of your community.
Yes.
And we can do the same with disability. We can do the same with a
Yes.
lot of different things, where whenever you stand up and you are talking about your stuff and a Black person says, hold on a second, you're doing a racism, and then you want to sit and make those types of distinctions, you're saying that we aren't part of your community, that we don't intersect with your community. And I honestly think that a lot of just speaking specifically within the religious space, there's a lot of people within various religious traditions who are finding their way, if not completely out of those traditions, finding ways to hold those beliefs that are less harmful. And I applaud that work. And I think that the low hanging fruit often within that work is to be like, okay, well, we're gonna deconstruct being LGBTQ affirming, and that is something that is work that is so important. But people do that work, and they forget that, like, racism, that white supremacy, if you were able to uproot that in yourself, it would uproot a lot of these other isms and phobias that you're doing. But it's almost as if, because whiteness and white people and our culture is so attuned to look past race. And I don't mean people be like, oh, I don't see color or whatever. It's not that you don't see it, because you do.
Mhm.
You see race, you see color, you can't help but to, if you have vision, if you possess vision in your eyes, you are able to see the difference. You're able to perceive those differences with people. And it's not that you don't see it, it's that you are looking straight past it, because white folks see themselves as the default. They see
Yes.
themselves as the regular person. As,
Yes.
yep, I'm just the regular person, or the real person, or the normal person, whatever language you want to use for it. But whiteness sees itself as the default. And because it sees itself as the default, and because also there have been so many um there's been so much work within our society to make the perception of racial difference, to make that a taboo, that people that just that you I've run into this so much in my life with people who do not experience diversity in their day-to-day life. They think that observing the differences makes them racist, and so they kind of just want to be like, oh, I'm gonna push the differences out of my mind, the cultural differences, the physical differences. I'm gonna kind of train myself, quote unquote, not to see them. But again, it's not that you're not seeing them, it's that you're looking past them. But in looking past those things, then you do a whole bunch of harm, because you end up doing a whole bunch of harm to people, because you're not confronting some of the realities that color and that prejudice and that all these other things bring to bear on people. And so, like, a concrete example of that, um I guess I'll try to give a concrete example of that. If you think about in the religious space, um, deconstructing your beliefs about various things. A lot of people might say, in certain spaces, might be like, well, I guess that, we're gonna throw out these scriptures, and we're gonna say, well, these things are hard, these things are oppressive, these things speak to this, that, and the third, about our reality, and it's negative. But then completely silence voices that might use that same material as a way to be liberated. And so, people might so another, I guess, to even be even more concrete with that. I had an experience a long time ago, where I was in a church, and we I was leading a group that was studying the Psalms. And so, the group, it was meeting for like a certain number of weeks. And so for that certain number of weeks, because I knew that we couldn't make it through the whole entire book, so I had selected a group of psalms to go through. And so one of those psalms, that I wanted to do, which is a favorite of mine, is probably my favorite psalm, or one of my favorite psalms, is Psalm 35. And essentially that psalm, is talking about God contending with people who contend with them. The psalmist is saying, like, these people have harmed me. God, will you contend with these people? Will you cause, like, all this, calamity and all this other type of stuff to befall these people because of the way that they've treated me? And so, pulled that psalm out one week, and we were talking about, and some of the psalms I ended up doing, and it wasn't intentional, because I was actually looking at different parts of the psalm. For me, different parts of the psalm were sticking out, but I just happened to choose some of the psalms that are kind of like imprecatory psalms, which mean, like, psalms that are basically like, they're very strong prayers of, like, God, you got to deal with these people who are messing with me, and this is how I want you to deal with them. And some of the psalms I happened to choose, I didn't choose for those reasons. It just happened. Some of them just happened to have a few of those types of verses, in them. But Psalm 35 is definitely the whole point of the psalm is to be that. And so I was teaching this psalm, and talking about this psalm with people, with this group. And I happened to mention, that my mother had passed down this wisdom that came from my grandmother, that my grandmother likely got from her grandmother who raised her, or maybe one of her aunties or whatever who helped raise her. That whenever you're in these interpersonal situations that are difficult and hard, to pray that psalm, to go and read that psalm. And so I said this, and I mean, you would have thought that I had, like, called these folks like some sort of bad names or something like that, because there were some people in the group who were very, like, disturbed. But I mean, I wasn't saying, somebody cuts you off in traffic and so you pray Psalm 35 at them. That's not what that wasn't what I was saying. I was saying, I've been through some things in my life where this idea of asking God to contend with the people who contend with me, that's brought me life. That's brought where I felt hurt, where I felt harm. That's brought me to life, and not because, like, I wish for bad things to happen to my enemies, but because the sentiment that's there is like, God, I need you to deal with these people, because these folks are doing things that
I
are
love
harmful.
it.
I need you to deal with them, because if you don't deal with them, I'm going to deal with them, and you're not going to like how I deal with them, so I need for you to deal with them. And so these people in this group, like I said, I mean, you would have thought that I had said, hey, I'm out here saying, that like Satan is like what, like, I mean, you would have thought that I had just done something horrible to these folks. Because they couldn't understand it. They were like, why on earth? Like I'm so uncomfortable with this. That makes me uncomfortable. And
Gosh.
it's like, and because white folks, especially white women, it's always, I'm uncomfortable. It's like, okay, I gotta whisper. I gotta come. I gotta pull you aside. I gotta whisper. I'm uncomfortable. Like, well, that really makes me uncomfortable that you would say that. And blah blah blah. So it was this whole thing. And I'm like, and I was just kind of like, look, I'm gonna do me. It's whatever. But something that I realized in reflecting on that situation later is that, if you are in a position of privilege within society, and you hear somebody saying like, oh, hey, contend, like, whatever, you've not experienced that. I mean, maybe you've experienced it on a macro or on a micro level, but you've never experienced that on a macro level. So it doesn't make sense to you why somebody would read that scripture and would interpret it that way.
Mhm.
And so I say all of that then to say that whenever we get into some of these communities, and it's not just the religious space, it's other spaces too, but this is just a concrete example from that Black people's voices, that people from other parts of the world, whenever they look at the same thing that you're seeing, they have similar experiences in society. I think that the scripture is a good example of this, because it's a book. Yes, there's different ways to translate it and whatever, but you have this book, and the words in the book are the words in the book, and we read those words in the book, and it hits us a different way, and it means something different to us, because if you're somebody who has been oppressed, if you're somebody who's been down and out, then yes, I mean, Psalm 117, not Psalm 117, yes, I think it is someone, whichever one it is, that Psalm 137, I think it is, where it's like, where it's like, blessed are the ones who dash your children against the rock. That's violent. And I'm not here to apologize for that or say that's good. That's straight up violent. But whenever you think about the context of that scripture and who wrote it, and that psalm, and who wrote it and why they probably wrote it, that they probably wrote this because they weren't really wanting God to kill people's kids and to throw people's kids against the rock, but they were writing that as a way to say something, that so they didn't do it, and
Mm.
to say something to they're saying these things because they're trying to wish the worst, most horrible thing that they can on the people that are harming them. And
Mhm.
so, and that definitely raises questions, is like, why are all these things even in this book that we consider to be holy in the first place? But then we have to confront with that. We have to confront our own biases. We have to confront our own ways of viewing the world and how our lenses. And I think that white folks, because they've always been at the top of the religious heap in the society, they've never had to think about how other people who are on the margins, who are on the bottom of the society, how they read those things. things
Mhm.
and how we see those things, and how we're not out here thinking, like, yes, we actually, want God to kill people. We actually want this to happen, but it's giving us a sense of, we feel seen in our struggle. We feel seen in who we are. We feel seen in all these different respects of our lives. But white folks don't want to do the work of essentially, decolonizing, or essentially decoupling their faith or their politics or their activism or whatever it is from white supremacy. So they cannot perceive whenever a voice from the margins, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that you have to apply it to your life. If you're a religious person, it doesn't mean that you have to live your faith in that same way. But realizing that other people are different than you, and they see the world different than you, and they have a different perspective and a different way of living and moving and having their being in this life. And being a person who cares about freedom, being a person who cares about justice, again, you don't have to adopt what everything ain't for you. Everything ain't for you because it's not made for you. And everything might not be for you because you just might not jive with it. And that's okay. But recognizing that people have a different perspective, and people are going to see, they're going to hear, they're going to read, they're going to perceive, they're going to interact with way different. But oftentimes what white folks in some of these different types of spaces do is they shut down anything that isn't within their accepted worldview, within their accepted space of understanding. They shut it down, they criticize it, they say, oh, that's angry. So,
Yeah, God.
you wanted to read Psalm 35 and wanted to study
Oh,
that. Well, ooh, that's angry. You wanted to call out the racism in this space. Ooh, you're being angry because they want our brilliance. They want our presence whenever it affirms the things that they believe in. And especially I think whenever we start talking about race and tokenization and that type of stuff, they want you around. They want you they want you to be on the board, or they want you to be a leader, or they want you to be in the space whenever you can continue to affirm the things that they believe in, and that they're going to keep doing, and the things that they're going to keep saying. They want you to be there whenever that happens. But whenever you're doing that, but they don't want you to be there the minute that you start pushing back and saying, I'm not too sure about this. This kind of giving racism. This is kind of giving whatever. They don't want you anymore.
Yeah. Chanel, tell Allie about the apostle. I can't remember golly, I can't remember his name, but he gave a talk at Allie, and every 6 months the bigwigs in Salt Lake do a what they call a general conference. So they will speak, and we all stay home and watch it on television. So it's held twice a year. And so I can't remember if it was I think it was just last year. The one apostle, there's one Black apostle out of all of the hundreds that there are. And he gave a talk.
There's always one. There's
You gotta,
always one. They always manage to find one. That
yeah, you got
one.
to have
And we're
one.
diverse. We didn't get. But anyway, I'm
One.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, but he
it was
taught
a mod.
he talked on activism.
A mod.
How that yeah, that's what it was. And he tell her about how he said how activism is bad. We don't need to be active. We need to, and it was like, of course that's who you chosen. Let's have him talk on that so that people will go, oh, even the Black guy says this is
Mhm.
bad. So it must be really bad.
He did the Candace Owens situation where, hey guys, it's okay. I'm Black and I don't have a problem, and I'm Black, and activism, it goes against this and that. But I that was one of the Mormon Story episodes that I was commenting on, that I spoke on him saying about activism. But as Ali was speaking, it made me think of something she said about, when she was talking about that scripture and how it made the other women uncomfortable, white women specifically. And the reason why is because they don't experience things Black women experience. So if I'm a type of person that experiencing violence, I'm just using that as an example, and another person is never around that, I'm going to interpret the world and my surroundings a lot differently than a person who hasn't. So, for example, when Ali was talking, it made me think about what happened to me recently in the ex-Mormon space. I have a lot of white women mad at me because there was somebody in that space that was harassing me, and it was a male, and I didn't appreciate it, and so I responded to that, and I used an example of a secretariat bird. A secretariat bird has really long, powerful legs, and they stomp the head of snakes. I use metaphors and stories a lot to bring my message. I'm usually like, hey guys, I would really like to work it out. They're not used to me getting mad. So I said that I was like a secretary bird stomping the heads of snakes that come in my yard. They freaked out. I also had said, I'm like a cobra. A cobra gets a bad reputation of being aggressive, which they're not. That's a water moccasin. A cobra is actually a very, very nice, docile snake. But if you pursue it, it has the venom to harm you and to kill you. And so, as long as you just leave it alone, it's not going to do anything to you. So, I was explaining to them, as long as you leave me alone, and I'll try to run away. You keep bothering me, I'll walk away. I'll walk away. But if you keep punching me, I'm going to turn around and punch you back. I just hit harder. They
Mhm.
lost it. They lost it. They were like, she's violent. She's scary. We got to stay away from her. She's going to harm people. And I was like, what? You got all that from me giving analogies of leave me alone. I was having a beef with a friend and they got involved. The funny thing is, I hadn't shared anything yet. It was him talking to them. And so then they were privately messaging me, telling me, hey, I heard this. You need to back off. I was like, it's none of your business. So I made a blanket statement to anybody that I didn't know of that I will be like that Secretary Bird. Oh my gosh, that did not go over well. Now I'm violent and I'm so scary. And it's just weird how being loud. Like Ali talked about being loud, and I was being very loud. I was like, that's enough. Leave me alone. And they didn't like it because they're used to telling me what to do. And that's what they were doing. They were messaging me, telling me, you need to be nice to him. You need to do this. It was none of their business, right? But they were telling me what to do. And I was saying, no, I don't want to listen. I am 52 years old. I'm a grown woman. I will deal with a beef with a friend the way I see fit. You don't know all the facts, stay out of it. And they said, no, we're in it because you're mean. So for 3 years, I haven't been mean, but all of a sudden, I'm mean because of the way I describe me responding to harm. Ali, I have a question for you. Um, when it comes, because when you were talking about, white people understanding that they are the default, that they are the people that you reference, I have a question. You talked a lot about respectability politics. Um, how comfortable do you feel describing what that means to you? When you talk about respectability politics, what does that look like? What is, or for anybody that doesn't know, what is respectability politics?
Respectability politics is essentially this idea that people from marginalized communities, if they behave in ways that please or that even appease the dominant culture, that it will gain them respect, that it'll gain privileges, that it will help them or the group, either an individual or a group, to move forward within society.
Yes. And that's what I was getting at. And that's what I was trying to explain to people when I was giving my examples. And when you talked about Henry Louis Gates, ugh, you talked about, you said shut up or be shut up. Existing is loud. Our loudness is considered angry. What you know, everything that you were saying just kind of took me back to some of the things I was experiencing. Um, you also said something. This you said, when you say that you haven't always been confident, outspoken about your blackness. I felt a lot about that because um, I've always had to just be agreeable. I had to just make make them feel comfortable. But when you think about that, in different spaces, I've thought about the default. Every party I go to, there is no one that looks like me. The music is fine, but I can't dance to it. The food is fine, but it's, you know, the default is what they know. So if they come to a party that I host, it's loud, the music is bumping, it's this, it's that, and there's like, ooh, that's too much. I always hear it's too much. When you talked about the nails, I almost lost it. My nails are usually that long, and they're bright, and they have lots of things on it. There's 5 different colors. My hair, I mean, I put extensions in, I put in blonde, I put in color, and they're like, "Oh, you need to go to a more natural look." And usually I wear red lipstick. I have my red. They're like, "Oh, that's that. No, you need to calm down." And I'm like, "I need to calm down. What?" And just, "Oh, the way you're dressing, you've got porn shoulders. Like I don't want to see your shoulders. What's wrong with my
Mm.
shoulders?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just too much. Oh, that dress. Oh, it's always too much, too much, too much, too much, too much for
Mhm.
who? Too much for
Yeah.
who?"
Well,
Mhm.
and I think too, a combination of the Victorian sentiment is so strong in the Mormon religion. We sit in a what we call a sacrament meeting, would be our normal congressional meeting. And so we sit quietly. There's no applause. There's no verbal outburst. No one's saying amen, or someone would get up and do a beautiful cello musical, and everyone just kind of goes, that's very nice. Absolutely nothing, nothing. And so, anything outside of that is, and like, very strong dress code, very strong food requirements, clothing, but that, which is very true in a lot of fundamental Christian religions. So you've got like that on top of that, on top of that. And then when you've got whitewashed history, like, for example, my husband and I were down in St. George, Utah. And when Brigham Young took all the pioneers out to Utah, his idea was to have a theocracy. He really was escaping the United States. He went into a Mexican territory, thought that he could finally have the kingdom that would be only Mormon, and he wanted to be self-sufficient so that they didn't have to go into the outside world for anything. So we will grow our own food, we will provide our own oil and copper and minerals and everything. Silk, we will bring in silkworms and we will weave and we will grow cotton. He thought, hey, St. George, Utah is kind of got that same arid, maybe we could grow cotton and we won't need to get cotton from anybody. So he wanted to be as self-sufficient so that he could have a total theocracy. And then they quickly learned that wasn't going to work. They were going to have to join the union. And so, well, what do we have to do to join the union? And so they chose to be a slave state. They could have chosen to not, but to go along. Plus, there were slaves in Utah. Brigham Young had some, and so my husband and I are going through this tour of St. George, Utah, and we're looking at some of the historical sites. And this sweet old lady who's probably serving what they call a mission. She's been indoctrinated. This is what you will say. And she will say, Joseph Smith grew wine and he tried to grow cotton, but it didn't work really well. And, the name of this, Dixie College is down there and they call it Dixie. And, but we didn't, there were no slaves. There was nothing to do with, the situation that was going on in the 19th century. No, that had nothing to, and I'm like, oh, you don't even know your own history. You don't even know. And I'm not judging because I didn't know either. But what's sad is when you learn and you tell them and they're still like, that's not true. That's not true. Because they're just so entwined with their, like you say, their default white, Protestant Victorian, that it can't be true. If it's true, then what is my world? I have to go along with what I think my world is. And then Chanel, I was thinking as you were talking, I thought of all of the ex-Mormon activities that I've been to, because Mormonism is 95% white, the ex-Mormon world is 95% white, right? So everything you're going to is the same thing. You're still that little token person sitting over there in the corner. And the other thing, Allie, like you said, even though we've left this religion, we haven't quite left the patriarchy. So
Oh,
even in the ex-Mormon world, the patriarchy is in charge. And in fact, I went the last year. I don't remember if you knew anything about it, Chanel, but they had a women's conference. It was an ex-Mormon women's conference. And this is who was conducting, and this is who was organizing. One of the speakers was a male. Out of all the speakers, but one of them was a male. And I said, why is he there? Why did you invite him to be there?
are you talking about Thrive?
It was a Thrive for Women. Do you remember?
I was there. I taught a couple of classes there.
Okay, and Anthony Miller was asked to
Yeah,
speak.
he
Now
was
I
there.
love Anthony. I love Anthony, but I
Yeah, I
purposely
was there
didn't
when
go because I was like, why is Anthony there? Why did you have to have the male speaker? Because he's a great guy? Because he
it was a
asked if he
women's
could
conference. I
speak?
understand.
It was the women's conference, and I thought you can't let go of the patriarch. You were, first of all, you were nice. He probably said, would you mind if I spoke at your conference? And being indoctrinated women to know our place, I'm sure the people in charge went, absolutely, we would love to have you because we're inclusive and we're loving. And so we asked, and I'm like, you don't see it. You didn't see that you still had to have that man be there to speak at a women's conference. So I thought you can't let go of the patriarchy. You're letting it in still. But anyway, Allie, we could talk to. Let me just read one more thing from your book. I love this. This is in the chapter. You don't have to shut up either. Leave them on. Leave them on read. Okay, read. Leave them on read. You say a hard lesson I have learned over the years is that you can't bring everyone along on the journey with you. There are going to be points when the path you're on forks and you must choose which way to go. When you choose a path, everyone in your community may not come with you. Some people will choose the other path. If you're lucky, you might once again cross paths with people who you once diverged from, and you'll share tales and wisdom from the other side. You might journey together for a time and then diverge again. You might diverge from some of your community and never be on the same path with them again. And still, there are others who see the fork in the road and decide they cannot make a choice. And so they will stay where they're at. And that is so true. When with all the changes and things that are going on in our society right now, there are some people that you're just going to have to say goodbye. I love you. And then other people that you will meet up again, and you'll find out that they decided to join you on the path. And now you have all of these things. And there's other people that, just like I was saying before, that say, I know, but I can't. I just can't. I can't leave this comfortable path that I'm on because it's what I've always done. It's who I've always been. Yeah. What were you going to say, Chanel?
I was going to say, so we're at an hour. So I have two more questions and one
Okay.
last thought. May I ask these questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Allie, this is a question I wrote down. I thought I have to ask her this. Where did I put that question? You talked about you talked about public advocacy, but hold on. Oh my gosh, where's my question? Oh, in chapter 11, you said diverse don't mean free. I got that. You said I won't shut up. And my question is, oh my gosh, I wrote down that question. Oh, here it is. When your husband. Okay, so your book, who do you feel that your target audience is and how do you reach them? Two, how have you felt that the Black community has received your book? And three, how do you feel Black community have received you as a person sharing your life of your husband, your book, and your experiences? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, yeah. So the target audience for my book I wrote the target audience for my book. I wrote this book, specifically for Black women, and then, kind of within that, realizing, that other Black and brown and indigenous people, other people who are kind of color, who are also of marginalized identity, would understand that and would get that. And then kind of, broader out, understanding that white women also, would resonate with some of the message there, and then kind of out in terms of the different kind of circles and intersections of identity, from there. So that's who I wrote the book. That's who I wrote the book for. I feel like that people within the community, within the Black community, I feel like that I've gotten a lot of, positive reception, from people within that community, who have read my book. There are a lot of people who are of similar experience to me, who have, there's lots of people of similar experience to me who have really resonated with it, who it's really been like, yes, you are telling the things that you're telling my life. Like, were you following me around? Like, did we grow up in the same place? Are you me? Like, kind of that sort of
Oh my
thing.
gosh,
And so
yes.
that's, so I
Yes,
feel like that it's really resonated
that.
with people in that respect. As far as people, and their responses to me, being in an interracial marriage, um, I think that response, I would say that for people kind of within the Black community, that's maybe kind of, mixed, for definitely want of a better word there. I feel like that, for the most part, because my husband, he first of all, recognizes that he's white. He's a white man. He's kind of just your average kind of white dude and whatnot. Very self-aware, very aware of, who he is and the space that he holds within society,
Yes.
which has made our relationship then, exist in a good way, because I've not, there's sometimes where I've had to be like, okay, bro, like,
Yeah.
you need to, you need to listen, because of course, he's a white man, socialized as a white man. But for the most part, I feel like, that those types of experiences are few and far
Yeah.
between, and are very, rare in our relationship and whatnot. And so, he's a white guy that knows that he's white, understands his position in society. So he's not really, like, sometimes whenever you get black, or whenever you get, white men married to Black women, you sometimes get the dudes who, like, they kind of want to be Black themselves.
Right.
And there's maybe even like kind of like a level of like fetishization
Yeah.
there that takes place. Um, my husband isn't one of those types of people,
Mine either.
which is good. It's like, he knows who he is, he understands his limits as a person and whatever. And so within the community, I think that, the Black community and stuff that we are part of, the people who are within our community, I think that people accept him and accept us very, very well. Because again, he knows his role, and so, he knows his role. He knows how to act, and so people generally kind of have a positive response to him. Of course, there are people, and I have received, ignorant comments in the past from folks, and those people are going to be those people. Some people don't understand. I mean, I say I've received ignorant comments in the past. I also occasionally will have people, jump in and say, kind of be kind of weird and say kind of weird stuff,
Oh yeah.
to me. That happened actually fairly recently. It was kind of weird. I had to
Oh yeah.
block someone, in fact, because they came into a post that, wasn't intended to be public. It accidentally became public because it was sharing from my Instagram. But they came into a post, that actually involved one of my kids, and,
Mm-mm.
were saying like just some they were saying some weird stuff. They had somehow managed to find me on Twitter and were saying some weird
Oh yeah.
stuff and whatever. They might have even emailed me. They might have even found my contact form and emailed
Mm-mm.
me and were saying some weird stuff. just kind of like, okay, cool, like, block. Like I don't, view sometimes I get
Yeah.
that. I get that from black people and from white people
Oh yeah.
who are just like indignant because, how dare I speak out about racism, and be married to a white man. And, people like that, it's unfortunate. Who I have chosen to share my life with has, really, minimal if no effect on my ability, to be able to speak up and to speak out about racism. A lot of times people, I think that kind of, speak in that way, don't know my story,
Right.
don't know or understand, like, some of the nuances of my story. Like, I met my husband in high school, and I went to, like, a predominantly white high school
Yeah.
in a very, very white town.
Yeah.
And so that just happened to be who was there, and that happened to be who I fell in love with. And if I was in a different set of circumstances, if the 2 of us had made a different set of choices with our life, I might be with somebody different. I
Agreed.
might
I
I might
get
still be
it.
with the white man, or I might be with the black man, or I might be with somebody completely different. And so anyway, so it's always kind of discouraging whenever people, kind of jump in and say stuff and are kind of mean spirited and they don't maybe necessarily know what they're talking about. But I would say that for the most part, I've had way more positive experiences and way more positive feedback or discussion than I have negative.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Allie, tell everyone, so what's your handle on TikTok?
My handle on TikTok is the Allie Henny. So you
I
can find me there on TikTok with
I just
that.
missed
Let's
the
see, I'm
part.
on Face
Yeah,
Yep, so
yeah.
that's my handle on TikTok. You can get me on Twitter. I'm on there sometimes. Right now, I'm kind of tweeting about some stuff going on in a ministry that I used to be connected with. Wasn't formally part of, but was connected with. But I'm on Twitter at the Armchair Com, which is short for the Armchair Commentary, which is my blog that I write on occasionally, and I'm trying to do more to write on. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook just as my name. If you look up Allie Henny, you will find my writers page. If you follow my personal account, I generally don't add friends unless I know folks. But you're welcome to follow me there. But you're not going to get like a whole lot that's interesting there. So you might as well just follow the public page. Let's see, I am infrequently on Threads. Again, it's just my name. And then I also have a Patreon. Once again, my name,
Ooh,
very
excellent.
easy. And I have a Substack that I infrequently post to. That again, once again, if you just look for my name, you'll find a shot of Henny, and that's my Substack.
Shot Henny.
I love that.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
I love it.
That's great. That's great. And then your book, of course, is available. I read Audible is where I got the audio version, but they can get it anywhere you can get a book, right?
Yep,
Amazon,
yep. Anywhere.
Borders, everywhere, right?
Yep,
Yes.
Amazon, anywhere you can get a book online. And then yeah, and then I know that my book is at Barnes& and Noble too. I think Barnes& and Noble carries it. So, yeah, just about any place you
Thank you.
can get books. And if it's at a place, you can always order it to that place, and they'll carry it.
That's great. And I mean, I know a lot of people are really big on, they prefer to have the book, in their hands, what I have found in my case is I've ended up buying books and listening to the audio
I
at the
do
same
both.
time.
Both.
Yeah. But for some reason, sometimes you'll get a narrator on a book and it's like, that voice doesn't match the voice that I put in my head when I was reading it. But in your case, I thought, you should listen to the audio, because you reading your words just emphasizes the parts that need to be emphasized. So I would definitely tell people to get the audio,
Yep.
listen to her tell her story verbally, but also get the other book, because you're going to want to do what I've done with highlighting and whatnot. So thank you so much. I can't believe you took all this time out of your evening, but it's just absolutely a pleasure. And Chanel, you as well. I know you're also crazy busy. Chanel has got some big stuff. She's a caterer and she's catering an event on Thursday. And she's also like hosting the event and then doing she's teaching at the event. So this is a crazy week for her. And I appreciate
Crazy.
Chanel. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, thank you again. And again, I can't tell you enough. I loved your words. And as a white girl, I had to listen to it and go, I know it's bad. There were a lot of times when I'm like, you're right. Okay. But that's the joy that I'm finding. Like I say, not only deconstructing my religion, I'm also deconstructing my upbringing. I'm deconstructing the land that I live in, the state that I grew up in. I was raised just south of Chicago, but my family moved me out to Washington State when I was 17. And doing a little bit of history, I'm finding out, how absolutely white Oregon and Washington are. I mean, the whole idea of colonizing Oregon was to keep it white. And I mean, I had no idea. And so, when you go to these places growing up, and the same thing, it's like, I think there was one Black family in the brand new high school that was built when my kids were just starting their high school experience in Oregon. And it never even I didn't even see it until you get out and then you go, well, there was no diversity in that state. I didn't even see it. And it's just like you were saying, it's like, unless you've experienced it, I'm glad that I've had the experiences that I've had in my life. I had a very disabled child. I have a grandson with autism. If it wasn't for those experiences, I wouldn't have the empathy and the compassion in that area of my life. So we all have, different things, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for it. I'm glad that I've deconstructed my religion because it's forced me to deconstruct other ideas and teachings that I was given. So, and your book helped me in other areas. So it's just amazing. And thank you again.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Allie.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
All right. All right. Good night, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. I can't say enough about this book, and I hope you can find it in your heart to read it with your own experiences and then take on what Allie's sharing and incorporate it into your life and listen to what she's saying, realize where you might be lacking in certain thoughts or ideas, and incorporate the lessons that she has there for you. And that's what it's all about. When I talk about becoming visible, there's so many areas of growth that we all have to experience. And so this is just another part of the path that we're all on as women, especially. And I love listening to another woman's voice who tried to go along to get along and finally recognized her worth and her value and stood up and became visible and used her voice. And that's what this podcast is all about. So thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for joining me today